Before the ball is even snapped, they're already coming for you, off the edge, hand in the dirt, eyes locked on the quarterback like a heat-seeking missile. You know what's coming, but stopping it? That's a different story. Defensive ends aren't just pass rushers, they're game wreckers, franchise killers. The reason coaches lose sleep and QBS develop trust issues. Today, we're counting down the 10 greatest defensive ends in NFL history. The freaks of nature who dominated the line of scrimmage, terrorized defenses, and carved their names into football legend. Carl Eller didn't just play defensive end, he defined it for a generation. You didn't block Carl Eller, you survived him, and even then you were probably limping back to the huddle, wondering what just happened. Drafted in 1964 by the Minnesota Vikings, Eller showed up in the league with a 6'6", 250-pound frame and a chip on his shoulder the size of Lake Superior. He was fast, he was mean, and he was about to become the face of one of the most feared defenses in NFL history. The Purple People Eaters. From the late 60s through the 70s, Eller was the terror off the edge. Offenses knew exactly where he was every snap, and it didn't matter. He was relentless, a pass-rushing machine who didn't take plays off, didn't talk much, and didn't care who you were. Quarterbacks didn't like him. Tackles prayed before games. And when you watch the film, it's obvious why. His get-off was violent, his hands were weapons, and once he had an angle, he was flat out unstoppable. Sacks weren't an official stat until 1982, but that didn't stop Eller from racking them up like it was a hobby. According to unofficial numbers, he finished with 130 career sacks. And if those were on the books, we'd be talking about him in every top 5 all-time pass rusher conversation. But it wasn't just sacks. He was a complete defensive end. One who played the run with just as much aggression, who brought pressure even when doubled, and who elevated an entire defense by setting the tone up front. He helped take the Vikings to 4 Super Bowls, and yeah, they didn't win any of them, but don't let the rings conversation fool you. Those Vikings teams were dominant, and Eller was one of the engines driving that dominance. 6-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first-team All-Pro, named to the NFL's 1970s All-Decade team, and when you look at the guys who played next to him, Alan Page, Jim Marshall, Gary Larson, it says something that Eller was the one opponents feared the most. He played his final season in 1979 with the Seahawks, but make no mistake, he'll forever be remembered in purple and gold. A towering, unstoppable force who helped turn Minnesota's defense into a nightmare factory for over a decade. In 2004, long overdue, Carl Eller was finally inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, because legends don't always get the stat lines they deserve. But the fear, the impact, the legacy, that part was never in question. Alright, let's talk about Michael Strahan, the smiling assassin who could split a double team in half, wreck your offensive game plan, and still be charming enough to host a morning talk show the next day. Before he became a TV icon, Strahan was one of the most dominant defensive ends the NFL has ever seen. A relentless trash-talking technician who turned edge rushing into an art form. Drafted in the second round of the 1993 NFL Draft by the New York Giants, Strahan didn't come into the league with a ton of hype. He played at Texas Southern, a small HBCU, and most scouts saw him as raw, a big guy with upside, but not much polish. And early on, they were kinda right. His first few seasons were quiet, but once the game slowed down and he refined his technique, Strahan flipped the switch and never looked back. By the late 90s, he was unblockable. He had that rare combo of speed, power, and leverage that let him beat you in a dozen different ways. You couldn't bull rush him, you couldn't get around him, and if your quarterback held onto the ball for even half a second too long, Strahan was already in the backfield introducing himself. Then came 2001, the season that changed everything. Strahan went nuclear, racking up 22.5 sacks, breaking the single season sack record in one of the most dominant defensive campaigns of all time. Yeah, there's controversy. Brett Favre kinda slid into that final sack like he was taking a dive at WrestleMania. But even if you wipe that one off the board, Strahan still would have led the league by a mile. He was everywhere that year. Quarterbacks couldn't breathe, tackles were getting cooked. It was like watching a man play on rookie difficulty. But Strahan wasn't just a one-season wonder. He had 6 double-digit sack seasons, was a 4-time first-team All-Pro, a 7-time Pro Bowler, and the heart and soul of the Giants defense for over a decade. He was vocal, fiery, and exactly the kind of leader leader New York thrives on, someone who backed up every word with action. And then, after all the individual accolades, all the frustration of near misses, Strahan got his ring. In 2007, during his final season, the Giants made an improbable run to the Super Bowl. They were underdogs, they were doubted, but they had that defense, and Strahan was the anchor. In Super Bowl 42, they went up against the undefeated, untouchable New England Patriots and beat them. Strahan and that defensive line terrorized Tom Brady all night. It was the perfect send-off, a dominant performance, a championship, and one last victory lap before walking away on top. He retired with 141.5 career sacks, making him the all-time franchise leader for the Giants and one of the best to ever do it off the edge. In 2014, he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, a no-brainer selection for a guy who spent 15 years giving offensive tackles nightmares. Michael Strahan wasn't just a sack artist, he was a tone setter, a leader, a guy who thrived in the trenches but always had something left for the camera. And whether he was terrorizing quarterbacks or making your grandma laugh on Good Morning America, one thing never changed. When the lights were on, Strahan delivered. Let's talk about Jack Youngblood, the guy whose name sounds made up for a football movie. And honestly, he played like he was. Tougher than leather, faster than you'd expect, and mean enough to make linemen dread showing up to work. Jack Youngblood didn't just survive in the trenches, he owned them, and he did it all with a kind of reckless blood and guts intensity that made it feel like the Rams were sending a Viking berserker off the edge every Sunday. Drafted in the first round in 1971 by the Los Angeles Rams, Youngblood didn't waste time becoming a menace. He took over for Deacon Jones, yeah, that Deacon Jones, and somehow managed to fill those massive shoes without blinking. He was a leaner, quicker kind of defensive end, but he hit just as hard, played just as mean, and carried himself like a guy who thought pain was just a rumor. By the mid-70s, he was the heart and soul of the Rams' defense, and the face of a front seven that straight up bullied people. He had this low coiled stance, and once the ball was snapped, he'd explode off the edge like a missile with bad intentions. He wasn't the biggest guy out there, maybe 245 pounds soaking wet, but he had perfect technique, a non-stop motor, and a refusal to be blocked. Double teams didn't faze him, trap blocks didn't fool him, and quarterbacks had about 2 seconds to throw the ball before Youngblood was in their lap. From 1973 to 1979, he was practically automatic. 7 straight Pro Bowls, 5 straight first-team All-Pro selections. He racked up 151.5 career sacks. Unofficially, since sacks weren't an official stat until 1982, making him one of the most productive edge rushers of his era. And he did it all while playing with a kind of fury that never shut off. Every snap, every quarter, every game, he was coming for you. But let's be real, the thing Jack Youngblood is most known for is pure, unfiltered toughness. In the 1979 playoffs, he broke his leg in the divisional round against the Cowboys. Most players would be done. Youngblood, he played the entire NFC Championship game, played the Super Bowl, and played in the Pro Bowl with a fractured fibula. That wasn't some myth, that's real. That's Jack Youngblood in a nutshell, and pain was just background noise. He helped lead the Rams to 5 NFC Championship appearances, and while they never won it all, they were contenders throughout the 70s. And Youngblood was the constant, always there, always making plays, always terrifying someone. He finished his career in 1984 and was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2001. Long overdue for a guy who played with that much impact and that much heart. Jack Youngblood wasn't flashy, he wasn't a soundbite machine, but he was football, distilled into its purest form. Violence, grit, and the will to dominate the guy in front of you no matter what it took. If you ever need proof that toughness is real and not just a cliche, just remember this: Jack Youngblood played in the Super Bowl on a broken leg and still made plays. Let's talk about J.J. Watt, the human battering ram who tore through offensive lines like they owed him money. He didn't just rush the passer, he detonated plays. A 6 feet 5 inches, 290-pound freak of nature with linebacker speed and lineman strength, J.J. Watt wasn't built to play football. He was built to wreck it. Watt came into the league in 2011, drafted 11th overall by the Houston Texans, and even though the pick got booed on draft night, it didn't take long for the city of Houston to change its tune. As a rookie, he made an instant impact. By year 2, he was on a completely different planet. In 2012, he delivered one of the greatest defensive seasons in NFL history. 20.5 sacks, 39 tackles for loss, 16 passes defended, and 4 forced fumbles. It wasn't just the production, it was the way he did it, swatting passes at the line, chasing down quarterbacks like a defensive end with a grudge and a jetpack, and dragging entire offensive game plans into the dirt. That year, he won his first Defensive Player of the Year award, and it wasn't even close. And then he just kept going. In 2014, he had another 20.5 sack season and somehow got better. He scored 5 total touchdowns, 3 on offense as a tight end, because why not, and played with a kind of chaos energy that made it feel like he was in the backfield before the snap even hit the quarterback's hands. He won Defensive Player of the Year again and became the first player in NFL history with multiple 20-sack seasons. By 2015, Watt was basically his own highlight reel. He won his 3rd DPOY, joining Lawrence Taylor and Aaron Donald as the only players ever to win it 3 times. At his peak, he was a one-man apocalypse. Double teams? He beat them. Triple teams? Still beat them. Rollouts, screens, quick throws. Nothing worked for long. He disrupted everything. And he did it all with a motor that never shut off. He didn't play football, he attacked it. But then came the injuries. Back surgery, torn pec, broken hand, another back surgery. And it felt like every season after 2016 came with some kind of brutal setback. But every time you thought he was done, he came back swinging. In 2018, after missing most of the previous 2 seasons, Watt bounced back with 16 sacks, 7 forced fumbles, and another Pro Bowl. Just a reminder that when healthy, he was still a nightmare. Watt finished his career with the Arizona Cardinals, playing his final season in 2022 and going out on his terms. Still productive, still disruptive, still JJ Watt. He retired with 114.5 career sacks, 27 forced fumbles, and the kind of legacy that doesn't need a ring to be respected. He was a 5-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first-team All-Pro, and a surefire Hall of Famer. But beyond the stats, JJ Watt was the face of a franchise, the heart of a city, and one of the most feared defenders the NFL has ever seen. He changed what it meant to be a defensive end, not just a pass rusher, but a playmaker, a leader, and an every-down force of destruction. When you played the Texans in the 2010s, you didn't ask, can we stop JJ Watt? You asked, can we survive him? Now for Roy Selmon, the original legend of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and one of the most dominant defensive ends you probably didn't hear enough about. Quiet, humble, and devastatingly effective, Selmon didn't need to run his mouth or puff his chest. He just lined up, exploded off the ball, and ruined your entire afternoon. Selmon came out of Oklahoma, where he was the anchor of Barry Switzer's wrecking ball defense and won basically everything there was to win, including the Lombardi Award, the Outland Trophy, and 2 national championships. He was so dominant in college that when Tampa Bay entered the NFL as an expansion team in 1976, they used their first ever draft pick, number 1 overall, to take him. And let's be clear, the Bucs were awful, historically, comically, painfully bad. But Selmon, he was elite from day one. In a franchise defined by losing, Selmon was the one bright spot. He was strong enough to collapse the pocket, quick enough to beat tackles off the edge, and smart enough to always be in the right place. He didn't rack up flashy sack numbers early on, because, again, sacks weren't officially tracked until 1982. But if you go back and watch the tape, he was living in the backfield. Quarterbacks were constantly under duress, and it was usually number 63 causing the chaos. By the late 1970s, Tampa Bay finally started to figure it out. In 1979, Selmon had his best season. He was the NFL Defensive Player of the Year, recorded 11 unofficial sacks, and helped take the Bucs, yes, the Buccaneers, to the NFC Championship game in just their 4th year of existence. He was the beating heart of that defense, the kind of player who made everyone else better just by showing up. Selmon went on to make 6 Pro Bowls, was named first-team All-Pro 3 times, and became the face of the franchise during a time when there wasn't much else for Bucs fans to hang their hats on. He was consistent, professional, and dominant, year in, year out, until injuries finally took their toll. He retired in 1985 after just 9 seasons, and the Bucs didn't sniff respectability again for a long time. But even in a relatively short career, Selmon left a massive impact. He finished with 78.5 unofficial sacks, countless pressures, and even more broken game plans. He was the first Buccaneer inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1995, and to this day, he's still considered by many to be the greatest player in franchise history. Roy Selmon didn't scream for attention, he earned it. He played with grace, humility, and brutality. and in a league full of noise, he let his dominance speak for itself. For Tampa Bay, he wasn't just a great player, he was the foundation, the first cornerstone, the original standard. Let's talk about Doug Atkins, the original freak of nature. A man so big, so strong, and so absurdly athletic for his size that he basically broke the mold for what a defensive end could be. Standing at 6'8", 260 pounds in the 1950s, Atkins wasn't just ahead of his time. He was living about 4 decades in the future, terrorizing quarterbacks before teams even knew what a pass rush specialist was. Atkins started his career with the Cleveland Browns in 1953 after being taken in the first round, but it didn't really click there. 1 year in, Paul Brown sent him packing, reportedly because Atkins didn't feel like showing up to practice unless it was full speed, full pads, and full contact. So naturally, the Chicago Bears picked him up, and that's where the legend truly began. For 12 seasons in Chicago, Doug Atkins was the most physically intimidating player on the field, and possibly in the entire league. He was too tall to block properly, too powerful to push around, and had a vertical leap like an NBA forward. The man was swatting down passes like Dikembe Mutombo and flipping offensive tackles like they were folding chairs. He didn't just beat you, he embarrassed you. Linemen who faced him didn't talk trash after the game. They talked about surviving. The wild part? He didn't even play like a modern speed rusher. Atkins had that rare, terrifying combo of raw strength, explosiveness, and just enough rage to make every snap feel like a personal vendetta. He'd club, throw, and toss linemen out of the way like they were wearing cleats made of sand. And because sacks weren't an official stat during his era, his dominance often flies under the radar. But if they had kept track, he'd be up there with the all-time greats in every category. He helped the Bears win the NFL championship in 1963, anchoring a defense that made opponents question their life choices. In an era where offenses were simpler and linemen were smaller, Doug Atkins was an actual monster, a prototype for the modern edge rusher decades before the term even existed. Atkins finished his career with the New Orleans Saints, giving a struggling expansion franchise a little bit of credibility just by stepping on the field. He played 17 seasons, made 8 Pro Bowls, earned first-team All-Pro honors twice, and was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1982. But beyond the accolades, the film, and the fear, Doug Atkins was a culture shift. He proved you could be massive and athletic. He was the first defensive end who looked like he belonged on a different planet, not just a different team. If you're making a list of the most dominant physical forces in NFL history, Doug Atkins isn't just on it, he's towering over everyone else. Let's talk about Gino Marchetti, the original godfather of edge rushing. A man who played like every snap was a street fight and made a living out of dragging quarterbacks to the dirt before sack was even a recorded stat. Gino wasn't just one of the best defensive ends of his era. He was the blueprint, the prototype, the first guy who made people say, "We need to double team that." Marchetti was drafted by the Dallas Texans in 1952, which, fun fact, was a 1-year disaster of a team that folded immediately, but it didn't matter, because Gino landed in Baltimore the next year with the Colts, and that's where he became a legend. From the second he arrived, Marchetti brought a level of chaos off the edge that football hadn't really seen before. He was 6 feet 4 inches, 245 pounds, which in the 1950s made him look like Thanos lined up next to a bunch of insurance agents. But he wasn't just big, he was relentless, with a first step that caught tackles sleeping and a violent streak that made quarterbacks consider early retirement. He helped define what a true pass rusher looked like: long, aggressive, explosive, and mean. Marchetti didn't just contain the edge, he owned it. And because the NFL didn't start counting sacks until decades later, we'll never have the full stats to explain how dominant he was. But ask anyone who watched him play, he was living in the backfield. He had a nose for the ball, a motor that never stopped, and a rep for showing up in the biggest moments. None bigger than the 1958 NFL Championship game, widely considered the greatest game ever played. Marchetti was dominating at defensive end until he broke his ankle in the 4th quarter. And here's the thing, he refused to go to the locker room. He stayed on the sideline, laid down in agony, and watched his team rally to win in sudden death. That's who Gino was. Not just a force, but a leader. The kind of guy teammates would follow into war. He helped the Colts win 2 2 NFL championships, made 11 straight Pro Bowls, was named first-team All-Pro 9 times, and was eventually named to the NFL's 75th and 100th anniversary all-time teams. And in 1972, he was rightfully inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But Gino Marchetti wasn't just an all-time great. He was the great before greatness had a name. He didn't play for stats. He played for the win. And for every dominant pass rusher who came after, from Deacon Jones to Reggie White to J.J. Watt, they owe something to Gino because he helped invent the role they now dominate. He was the original nightmare off the edge, and if you were a quarterback in the 50s, chances are your nightmares wore number 89. Let's talk about Bruce Smith, the apex predator of the defensive line, the NFL's all-time sack leader, the man who made quarterbacks question their career choices before the ball was even snapped. Bruce Smith didn't just play defensive end, he reigned over it. For nearly 2 decades, he was the standard, the measuring stick, the storm coming off the edge with no forecast, no warning, just violence and inevitability. He entered the league in 1985 as the #1 overall pick by the Buffalo Bills, and from the moment he stepped on the field, it was clear they didn't just draft a great player, they drafted a future Hall of Fame problem. He was 6 feet 4 inches, 265 pounds, fast as hell, and somehow stronger than guys 40 pounds heavier. His first step was blinding, his hand technique was lethal, and once he got leverage, it was over. Your quarterback was going down, and there wasn't a damn thing you could do about it. Smith's early years were impressive, but it was in the late 80s and into the 90s where he went full juggernaut. He was the centerpiece of a Buffalo defense that went to 4 straight Super Bowls, and even though they never won one, it wasn't because of Bruce. In 1990, he racked up 19 sacks, won NFL Defensive Player of the Year, and was unblockable the entire season. The man required double teams by default, and even then, he'd split them like they weren't there. He had the strength to bull rush you and the speed to run past you. Pick your poison. Either way, your quarterback's getting hit. And he didn't just dominate for a few seasons. He did it for nearly 20 years. He had double-digit sacks in 13 different seasons, which is completely insane. And he aged like fine wine mixed with gunpowder. Even in his late 30s, while playing for Washington at the tail end of his career, he was still outplaying linemen 10 years younger than him. In 2003, at age 40, he played his final NFL game and walked away with 200 career sacks, the most in league history, still untouched. He was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, an 11-time Pro Bowler, 8-time First-Team All-Pro, and a charter member of the NFL's 100th anniversary all-time team. He played in 279 career games, started all but one, and finished with more sacks than entire franchises. And somehow, through all that, he never lost the hunger, never coasted, never phoned it in. Bruce Smith showed up every week with the same mission: blow up your game plan, hit your quarterback, and remind you that greatness wears number 78. In 2009, he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and it wasn't even a debate. Bruce Smith wasn't just one of the greatest defensive ends of all time. He is the greatest, statistically speaking, and when you combine the production with the longevity, the dominance, and the fear he struck into offenses every single week, you start to realize he might be the greatest defensive player ever, period. Now we reach Deacon Jones, the man who didn't just rush the passer, he invented it, the Secretary of Defense. The reason we even have the word sack in football. Before Deacon Jones, defensive ends were just big dudes setting the edge. After Deacon, they were headline-grabbing superstars who made life miserable for quarterbacks on every down. Jones was drafted in the 14th round of the 1961 NFL Draft, back when teams were taking guys halfway through lunch. The Rams scooped him up, and what they got was a once-in-a-generation pass-rushing nightmare. Deacon wasn't just strong, he was explosive, mean, and had a motor that wouldn't quit even if the stadium lights shut off. He played angry, like every offensive tackle had personally insulted his family, and he made sure every quarterback knew where he was. Spoiler, he was in the backfield. He made his name with the Los Angeles Rams as part of the legendary Fearsome Foursome alongside Merlin Olsen, Lamar Lundy, and Rosie Greer, one of the most dominant defensive lines ever assembled. But even among legends, Deacon stood out. His first step off the line was blinding. His hands were violent, and he popularized the infamous head slap, a move so vicious it was eventually banned. Imagine getting hit in the side of the helmet by a 270 270-pound monster just to get your balance, and then realizing he's already passed you. And even though sacks weren't officially recorded during his era, Deacon was doing it better than anyone before or after. According to unofficial stats, he had 173.5 sacks, including 26 in a single season back in 1967. To put that in perspective, that number would still be the NFL single-season record if it were official. The man was a one-man apocalypse on the edge. The original problem offensive coordinators couldn't solve. He was a two-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year, an 8-time Pro Bowler, 5-time First-Team All-Pro, and was named to the NFL's 75th and 100th anniversary all-time teams. And again, he did all of that in an era that barely even tracked defensive stats. No one was counting sacks, but they sure as hell were counting bruises. Quarterbacks knew, linemen knew, coaches knew. You didn't stop Deacon Jones. You just hoped he got bored. Off the field, he was charismatic, intense, and always had something to say. He once described a sack as putting a quarterback down with malice, which is maybe the most Deacon Jones sentence ever spoken. He wanted to punish you, embarrass you, let you know that next time it was gonna hurt even more. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1980, and to this day, he's still the measuring stick. You can talk about records, rings, longevity, but when you're talking about pure pass rushing terror, Deacon Jones is still on the Mount Rushmore. No one did it like him, no one talked it like him. And without Deacon, quarterbacks might still be sleeping peacefully. Let's talk about Reggie White, the man they called the Minister of Defense. And for good reason. He wasn't just great, he wasn't just dominant, he was biblical. Reggie White played defensive end like he had a personal vendetta against every offensive lineman in the league, and for over a decade and a half, he backed it up with violence, grace, and a bull rush that felt like getting hit by a freight train with a sermon attached. Reggie started his pro career in the USFL with the Memphis Showboats, but the second that league collapsed, the NFL came calling, and the Philadelphia Eagles struck gold. He arrived in Philly in 1985, and from the moment he took the field, he was unstoppable. He was 6 feet 5 inches, 290 pounds, quick off the line, with hands like jackhammers and the power to collapse an entire pocket with one shove. His signature move, the club and rip, wasn't just a pass rush technique, it was a weapon of mass destruction. From 1986 to 1991, White went on one of the most ridiculous defensive tears in NFL history. In 1987, during a strike-shortened 12-game season, he posted 21 sacks. 21 in 12 games. That's not football, that's statistical arson. He finished his career in Philly with 124 sacks in 121 games, which isn't just Hall of Fame worthy. It's straight up video game stuff. Then came the shocker. In 1993, Reggie became one of the first true high-profile free agents in NFL history. And instead of chasing a legacy in a big market, he signed with the Green Bay Packers, a small market team still trying to find its identity. And that move changed everything. Reggie didn't just elevate the Packers, he transformed them. He brought leadership, fire, and credibility to a team that was on the rise. And by 1996, he helped bring Green Bay its first Super Bowl title since 1967, recording 3 sacks in Super Bowl 31 and reminding the world, even in his mid-30s, that he was still an absolute force. He retired in 1998 with 198 career sacks, which at the time was the all-time record. He made 13 Pro Bowls, was named First-Team All-Pro 8 times, and won 2 NFL Defensive Player of the Year awards. He was also named to the NFL's 1980s and 1990s All-Decade teams, and when the league made its 100th anniversary team, Reggie was a no-brainer. But beyond the stats, the sacks, and the accolades, Reggie White was different. He was feared, yes, but he was also respected, deeply. He carried himself with a sense of purpose, both on and off the field. He was a minister, a motivator, a mentor, and somehow he still managed to be the most dangerous man on the field every single week. In 2006, Reggie White was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame just a year after he tragically passed away at the age of 43. And honestly, there's no way to talk about the greatest defensive players in NFL history without putting his name at or near the very top. Reggie White didn't just dominate, he redefined domination. And whether you were watching him tear through offensive lines in Philly or carrying a title-starred franchise in Green Bay, one thing was always certain. When number 92 was coming, you weren't stopping him. You were just hoping to survive. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to press the like button and comment down below so it can hit the algorithm. Also consider subscribing so we can hit our goal of 15,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Thank you so much for watching.